morning, good afternoon, good evening, all. It's Bear here. And I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, aboxwithnolid, a channel that I'm working to put together. I'm dedicating to not only just bringing awareness of complex trauma, but I want to really start to delve in ways you can support yourself to heal, to get a better quality of life, and to understand some of the mechanics behind what is going on. Because as in my experience, and I know of many people that I've spoken with, the resources to get the help is so expensive. And it's out of reach of the majority of us. So I'm trying to create ways you can, understand a little bit more, but also take some really positive steps to help bring you into a better position to heal. And with this in mind, in today's video, in part 1 and part 2, I want to raise a mechanism that we all have because it's biological. A mechanism that plays out in every facet of our life. And something that we really need to be aware of because it's something that we cannot change. We can only work with it. And what this is it's the biological mechanism around connection, but it plays out in transference and countertransference. To put this in a simple way, wherever you spend the majority of your waking time, that when you're awake, and for most of us that's in some form of work, all those interactions that we have in that environment and all the responsibilities, decision-making, everything that is engaged within work, over a period of time, we will emotionally transfer to that place being the dominant part of our physical life, the most important part of our physical world. And we will emotionally transfer what we need emotionally to that environment. And that's where the danger lies, in several areas. It is a natural mechanism. It is how we're designed. And if you have somebody that works 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and their family at home goes, well, he's never here or she's never here, why don't we matter so much? And all these arguments that we see play out all the time. We may have had those arguments ourselves. It's because they've biologically transferred their emotional connection to that world because it is the dominant world, the functional world of their waking life. It is not their fault. They're not choosing to do it deliberately. It is how we're designed. Now that is, for me, the easiest way to understand this transference mechanism. Because it plays out, and particularly in trauma, it plays out in many variations. One of the most risky is, the attachment to a therapist or to a support person. And I'll get to that in a moment, and more of that in part 2. But the reason I raise it now is when we're looking at healing trauma, the transference mechanism is how we interpret it, is constructed by how we think we can heal. And when we're looking at preverbal or early childhood trauma, those emotional expectations or those emotional requirements are from a very young interpretation. And they are very strong and they are very intense. And because of that, it shapes a lot of the facets of what we pursue, but also how things play out in our functionality in the outside world. And when I look at countertransference, because of those emotional expectations, the countertransference is how that environment, people or an environment respond to our emotional expectations of it. And then it goes this to and fro. And in my experience and what I've seen is it very rarely ends well. Now, to get into a little bit more of the mechanics of this. So we're biologically created as a herd or a group species. We're mammals. And the only way we are safe is if we're in a larger group. And for a larger group to function, people need to kind of align. I guess, if you're looking at, a bunch of, forgive the terminology, a bunch of cows in a paddock, something scares them and they stampede off. They will instinctively follow one leader and they all turn at the same time, unless they're completely so domesticated in that environment. But you'll see it in herd animals where they kind of run in this unison and they follow the course of the leaders of that group. Well, in a work environment, your boss, the board, the manager, they're the leader of that group. And you will start to align with what is required from that environment and from those leaders, because if you don't have a job. Or it creates problems and you end up getting pushed out, reduced hours, and you're forced to leave anyway. But this herd mechanic that we have, we cannot fight. We can only work with. It is too ingrained in our physiology. It's just got nothing to do with our cognitive structures. This is one of these fundamental mechanics behind our survival mechanisms and how we survive in a physical world. We need to understand that where we assign it will naturally occur, and we need to moderate that and be aware of that. And as I said in part 2, I'll get into some of the ways we can moderate it a little bit more. But it's, in the first step, it's having the appropriate perspective of expectation. And I guess when we're looking at transference into a work environment, work is there to provide what you need to do what you want to do. That is the primary purpose of work. We are conditioned in this society to put the perspective of work into a far more emotionally expectant, fulfilling role. And yeah, for some it is, but for the majority it will never be. It's a reality that we have, but it's not necessarily a bad reality. Work is there to provide the means to do what you want to do or need to do or wish to do. So with that in mind, if you emotionally engage in what it is you want to do outside of work, you emotionally engage within your family, within your social groups and all this stuff outside of work, within the activities that you choose to do, you will naturally start to moderate your transference. It will start to teach you how to moderate your transference. And remember, I'm going to get into the transference in a therapy setting in part 2 because there's a little bit more to it. I'm just trying to give you guys an overall, a way of learning this stuff, a way of observing and looking at it so you can get your own interpretations of it, using it as a way of, exploring it in your own world. So by putting the priorities in different places, there are those people that work long hours, but their priority is their wife or husband at home, their children at home, and building that life. And that priority is reminded to them through the work. I'm doing this because they don't transfer as much, and home still remains the priority. And it's through those interactions and engagements in whatever is your chosen dominant environment is where you will transfer to. What you need the most is where you'll transfer to. So keep this in mind because in part 2, when I step into the therapy part, the transference into therapy stuff, this can get a little tricky. And that's hence why, as I said, I'm doing the part 1 and part 2. The first part is to try to get you guys to be aware of and understand the structure or the mechanics of what I'm talking about. And the part 2 is I want to delve into some of the more, the healing parts, but also the touchier parts of it, so that it stays in the context and is not perceived as I'm trying to have a go at a therapy, which I'm not. But transference, as I said, is natural. It is a biological mechanism that we all have, a biological need that we all have. And when we're looking at trauma, we really need to be aware of it, of where we subconsciously assign our attachments and our priorities in our physical environments, which environment is the most important. Because when we understand that, we can look at that and explore how it gives back its countertransference and how that fulfills what we're asking of it. So as always, be kind and gentle with yourselves. Don't ever take anything that I say here to the degree of unraveling your life. I'm not meaning it that way. I'm just trying to bring you aware of the mechanics of what's going on. And be kind, be gentle with yourself. As always, I like your comments and I like your questions. And I'll see you next time. We'll see you in part 2. Hope.